Okay, so let's get it started with question number one. Part A, the highest savings rate is in Middle Altistan. In Part B, the highest borrowing rate is in Jovenia. And Part C, the highest rates of savings are in Decrepia, and this is all based on people's average age and the life cycle theory. Well, question number two, entrepreneurs demand loanable funds, and savers supply loanable funds. With part three, stocks are typically the riskiest type of investment. A corporate IOU is a bond. Stocks are considered a share or in part ownership of a company, and a bank account allows you to withdraw part of your investment at any time. Going forward, bank accounts usually have the largest numbers of investment projects. Bonds are usually rated by private companies, and the US government also offers bonds. With question number four, the supply of savings falls and the interest rate rises in order to incentivize people to put their savings back into the market. And with question number five, it falls because savers aren't willing to lend as much money at this lower interest rate, creating a shortage.
So question six dealt with a worst case scenario where financial intermediation breaks down, and it asked what category of the gross domestic product would fall the most. So overall, the biggest decline would be in investment. So investment will decline when financial intermediaries fail, because the institutions that bridge borrowers and lenders crumble, which halts the flow of cash and capital. So essentially, this turn shifts business growth to a decrease and makes it impossible for companies to borrow for long-term investments because that bridge between borrowers and lenders is broken by the failure of the banks. Question 7 had two parts, A and B. So there are three parts of this. Basics of all politicized banking systems, the effects of an interest rate ceiling, and the comparison of competition. Because low interest banks will be less successful. Why? Because essentially these low interest banks are being kept at essentially a price ceiling by these incentivized friends and politicization. So essentially this creates a shortage of savings that they're willing to lend out to borrowers. And also, this low interest rate means that they have reduced profits. So because they can't raise their profits because of the politicization and friends, that means they have less profits, and that means that there's essentially a price ceiling allowing them no room to move up to a point of equilibrium. So aggressive banks can remain more competitive and flexible because they're not tied down by a ceiling on how high they can put their interest rate at. So governments will prop up these uncompetitive zombie banks through legislation, and this legislation can look like national price ceilings on interest rates. And the way this works is it effectively levels the playing field at an unfair advantage for these low interest banks so that they can essentially compete with more aggressive high interest banks, even though high interest banks could be doing more successful and they could be having more success under a free market system. This is kind of compared to the example the book gave about Japan and their stifled economic growth from the 1990s to the 2000s. Question 8. So Gwen's overall annual consumption should be $55,000. Now we can find this by adding the previous amounts of 90,000 and 20,000 and then dividing them by 2. So this is essentially the average of the two. So in years where she's doing well and she's earning $90,000, she's spending $55,000, so she'll save $35,000. In years where she's having to borrow because she's only making $20,000 and she's spending $55,000, she's still only that's a net borrowing of $35,000. So, and why does she do this? Just basically to remain consistent, so she doesn't have to worry about hitting rock bottom or having a surplus of revenue. This basically just keeps her overall consumption consistent, regardless of whether she's having a good yearly income or a bad yearly income.
Question 9. In both cases, the supply of savings is decreasing, so the curve would be shifting to the left. As you can see on this graph, this is because the consumer savings is going down in each cases. Here, there's no more fixed 5% salary savings, and here the media is forcing people to not save as much or trying to live in the moment, basically. So the supply curve is decreasing in both cases. Question 10. These are the three big functions that a bank performs. And in part A, this is function 2. They're trying to spread out the investment risk. Part B, this is function 1. Basically, they're trying to evaluate. So they're trying to look out for the best option. Part C, this is function 3. They're basically lending money, similar to what an ATM does. Part D is back to function 1. They're trying to evaluate which is the best option. Part E, there's function 2. They're investing into multiple areas. So they're trying to spread their investment risk, basically, like a bank does with having multiple customers who deposit their money. And part F is again function 1. They're trying to evaluate the best option by subscribing to consumer reports. Question 11. So this is more of a logical and based on the information you know. So more entrepreneurs coming from rich families would be seen in poor countries because a poor person in a poor country, if he has an idea, he or she wouldn't be able to build up the idea because the banking system is so bad. Therefore, they cannot get any loans from the banks. On the other hand, in the rich country, the poor person can go to the bank and get a loan, and he or she is able to get money for their business since the banking system is really good. But in a poor country, this is not possible. So basically, more entrepreneurs coming from rich family will be seen in poor countries. Question 12. So here, if the interest rate is 11%, the break-even interest rate is the maximum interest rate in order for each of the projects. So for part A, for 11%, we look at the interest rates that have the low or the maximum is higher than the interest rate, or 11% higher than 11%, which is project B and project C. Therefore, that is the most probable cost-efficient project to go with. And if the interest rate is 6%, then it would be A, B, C, and E. D wouldn't be good enough because the interest rate is higher than break-even interest rate, which is the most optimal interest rate for them. Now we can, using the table here, we can create a graph. Basically, this is the actual curve or the connected points of the graph, and this is the trend line, which kind of represents the demand curve in this case. So the way to think about this is at a minimum interest rate of a certain interest rate, like for example 11% from this example, the total amount of money the company needs can be seen here. So say 11%, or let's say 10%, around here. For 10%, they're willing to lend about $450 million or so. So if we add every break interest rate above 10% and above, basically. So 150 plus 200 plus 50 plus 100, it'll approximately come around $450,000. So that's basically how you would do it.
So question 13 asks if a rise in government borrowing would make it harder or easier for a new business to sell stocks in an IPO, and in other words, are government bonds and corporate stocks substitutes or complements of each other? So the rise in government borrowing would make it harder for new businesses to sell stocks, and government bonds and corporate stocks are substitutes for each other. Question 14 asks to use the Fred Economic Database to search for student loans and look at the rise in student loans from 2006 to now. So in 2016, approximately how much student debt was owed? This was $1,358.13744 billion, and since 2006, this amount has steadily increased from $480.96698 billion to $1,676.71511 billion over about 14 years. Question 15 asks, the United States borrows a lot of money from other countries. So if you wanted to use the life cycle theory to explain this, would the US be acting like a young country, an old country, or middle-aged country? So the US is acting like a young country because according to the life cycle theory, people borrow money when they are young so that they can invest in education in order to be able to repay their debts and save money as middle-aged workers with good jobs. Then when they are old and in retirement, they spend their savings.